7 signs you become a wise elder without even knowing it. You probably don't think of yourself as a wise elder. That title? It sounds too grand, too serious, like something reserved for monks, philosophers, or tribal leaders. You're just living, doing your best, figuring things out as you go. And yet, what if you've already become someone that others quietly look up to? What if, without realizing it, you've crossed that invisible threshold? From simply growing older to actually becoming wiser? You don't need a robe, or a podium, or a perfect past. Wisdom doesn't require you to have all the answers. It just asks you to be awake to your story, to your pain, to your peace. You see, some elders grow louder, but the wise ones? They grow quieter, not because they're tired, but because they've started to listen differently. This video is a mirror, a soft reflection. You may not see yourself the way others do, but if any of these signs sound familiar, maybe you've already become the elder the world quietly needs, even if you've never called yourself one. Let's begin. Sign number 1. You value silence more than noise. There was a time when silence made you uncomfortable. You felt the need to fill every gap, to keep talking, to explain, to entertain. But something's shifted. Now, you don't fear quiet. You welcome it. You sit in it. You trust it. Sometimes, you even crave it. You've come to realize, not every space needs to be filled. Not every opinion needs to be voiced. Not every conversation needs a conclusion. Silence, to you, is no longer awkward. It's sacred. Silence is where the deep things live. In your younger years, you sought answers in books, advice, podcasts. But now, you know, sometimes the clearest answers come when you stop searching. It's in silence that emotions settle, that thoughts reorganize themselves, that clarity whispers, "Here I am." You don't need constant input anymore. You'd rather hear the birds, the wind, the way your own breath feels in your chest. You no longer compete to be heard. When others speak, you listen, genuinely. You no longer wait for your turn to talk. You're not trying to outshine or correct. You're just present. And when you do speak, people lean in, not because you talk often, but because when you do, it means something. You understand that wisdom grows in quiet soil. Growth doesn't always happen through action. It also happens in the pause, in the breath between stimulus and response, in the moment you choose not to react. And you've begun to protect those pauses. Not just in your day, but in your life. You don't overbook. You don't overshare. You've become more selective with your energy. That's not withdrawal. That's wisdom. The noise of the world no longer pulls you in. News, drama, opinion wars. You see it, but you're not swept away. You've become the calm in the storm. The observer. The one who no longer needs to prove or persuade. You understand that peace is not weakness. It's strength, refined. Here's the real sign. You no longer feel the need to win conversations. You'd rather have meaningful silence than meaningless words. And people around you feel that. Even if they don't say it. They feel safer around you. Grounded, heard, accepted. That's the gift of a wise elder. Not answers shouted from a mountaintop, but presence that speaks louder than words. Sign number 2. You've stopped needing to be right all the time. There was a time when being right felt important. You felt the urge to correct, to clarify, to jump in and say, "Well, actually," not because you were unkind, but because you wanted to help, or protect the truth, or feel respected. But somewhere along the way, that shifted. You started choosing peace over pride, harmony over victory, understanding over ego. You realized that being right isn't always what people need. You've seen it happen. You win the argument, but lose the connection. You prove your point, but create distance. You share your knowledge, but the other person stops listening. And you began to ask yourself, is this really worth it? Now, when someone says something you disagree with, you pause, you breathe, and sometimes you just let it go. Not because you're passive, but because you're present. You know that some truths reveal themselves in time. They don't need to be forced. You've looked at your own need to be right and questioned it. You've reflected on where it came from. A need for validation? Childhood wounds? A fear of not being heard? And you've softened. You've begun to trust that your worth isn't tied to always knowing the answer. The wise elder doesn't say, "I'm right." They say, "That's interesting. Tell me more." You understand that truth is bigger than one perspective. You've lived long enough to see both sides, to realize that certainty is often a mask for fear, and that humility opens doors that pride slams shut. You've learned that truth isn't always black and white. Sometimes it's found in the tension, in the listening, in the willingness to not know. Your relationships have changed because of it. You argue less. You listen more. You don't take disagreement personally. And you've noticed, people come to you more often now. Not for correction, but for comfort, for grounding, for perspective, because they don't feel judged. They feel heard. That shift, from, "I must be right," to, "I choose peace," is the path of wisdom. You no longer need to win, because you already know who you are. Sign number 3. You see patterns, not just problems. When something goes wrong, most people react. They blame, panic, get frustrated. But you pause. You step back. You observe. Over time, you've learned something powerful. Life repeats itself, until we learn the pattern. You no longer see everything as a crisis. You see it as a lesson in disguise. A chance to understand something deeper. In yourself, in others, in the rhythm of life itself. You see the threads others miss. You notice when a person keeps ending up in the same type of relationship. You sense when a child's tantrum isn't about the toy, but something else beneath it. You recognize when someone is speaking from pain, not truth. You're not just listening to what's being said, you're listening to what's underneath. Because you've been there, you've lived it, and your experience has taught you. Patterns don't lie. You don't ask, "Why me?" anymore. In your younger years, challenges felt unfair. You asked, "Why is this happening to me? Why can't I catch a break? Why do people always let me down?" But now, you've shifted. You ask, "What is this showing me? Where have I seen this before? What am I being invited to change?" You no longer fix symptoms, you understand roots. You've stopped chasing quick fixes. You know when stress isn't about a task, it's about self-worth. When anger isn't about the situation, it's about unspoken grief. When fear isn't about danger, it's about losing control. And instead of reacting, you respond with depth. You speak to the root, not just the surface. You don't rush to solve, you make space to understand. Younger minds want answers. Wise minds seek insight. You're not quick to fix people anymore. You hold space. You let others arrive at their own truth. Because you know, that's when it truly lasts. Problems feel smaller now, not because life is easier, but because your perspective is wider. You've zoomed out, and what used to feel chaotic, now feels like a dance. Imperfect, messy, but meaningful. You've become a pattern reader. And that changes everything. Because when you can see the pattern, you no longer get trapped in it. You move differently. You respond gently. You guide wisely. That's not just intelligence. That's life wisdom. Sign number 4. You're drawn toward simplicity, not complexity. There was a time when you chased more. More things. More goals. More plans. More explanations. You thought complexity meant importance. That the bigger, the faster, the louder, the better. But now, you're drawn to something else. Simplicity. Not because life got smaller, but because you got clearer. You've realized that peace often hides in the simple things. A quiet cup of tea in the morning. A walk with no destination. A conversation that doesn't rush. A space that feels open, uncluttered. These moments used to feel empty. Now they feel sacred. You've stopped needing to explain yourself all the time. You speak less, but say more. You no longer decorate your truth with fancy words. You just let it land, gently. You crave less stuff and more meaning. You've stopped chasing new. You started cherishing what already is. You decluttered your home. But more importantly, you've decluttered your mind. The noise? You've learned to turn it down. The people who drain you? You've lovingly released them. The pressure to be everywhere, do everything? You've stepped off that ride. And in the quiet, you found something priceless. Clarity. You no longer glorify busy. You don't need your calendar to be full to feel useful. You don't wear exhaustion like a badge of honor. You've learned that sometimes, doing less, means living more. You choose depth over speed, presence over performance, connection over chaos. Even your aesthetic has changed. You find beauty in minimalism, in clean space, in a well-worn book, in something old that still works. Because wisdom knows, value doesn't always come from shine. It often comes from substance. You understand that simple does not equal easy. You've learned, simplicity is a form of mastery. It takes courage to let go, to say no, to stop proving, to live aligned, quietly, steadily, truthfully, and you're okay with not having it all figured out, because you no longer need to control everything. You're not simplifying to escape. You're simplifying to return, to what matters, to what lasts. If you feel this in your bones, if simplicity feels like peace to you now, you're already walking the quiet, beautiful path of a wise elder. Sign number 5. You let people be who they are, even when you disagree. When you were younger, disagreement felt personal. If someone had a different belief, you took it as an attack. You felt the urge to explain, to fix, to convert. You needed to be understood, or else, it felt like disconnection. But now, something has shifted. You've realized, understanding someone is not the same as agreeing with them, and accepting someone is not the same as approving everything they do. You don't need to change people to feel peaceful. You've stopped saying things like, they'll understand one day, they're wrong, but I'll convince them. How could they believe that? Now you say things like, that's their journey. We see things differently, and that's okay. I can still love them from here. You've learned to stay soft in disagreement. Curious, not controlling. Open, not defensive. Because real wisdom doesn't need everyone to think the same. It can sit in difference and stay whole. You've realized that everyone has their own timeline. Some people wake up quickly. Some take years. Some may never. And that's not your job to control. You've learned to let people be in their own season. Even if it doesn't make sense to you. You don't rush their growth. You don't push your lens. You just walk your path, kindly, clearly. You no longer confuse silence with agreement. You've stopped arguing with everyone who thinks differently. Not because you don't care, but because you care about your energy. You know when to speak, and when to let silence do the talking. And when you do speak, it's not to dominate, it's to illuminate. You create safe spaces, even for opposing views. People feel calm around you, not because you agree with them, but because you don't judge them. They feel accepted, heard, seen, and that's rare in today's world. That's what a wise elder offers. A presence that says, you don't have to be like me for me to love you. Sign number 6. You find joy in giving without needing recognition. In the past, you may have wanted people to notice, to say thank you, to remember your help, to appreciate the effort you gave. That's human, that's normal. But over time, something inside you softened. Now, you give because it feels right, not because it feels rewarded. You help because you can, not because you must. You share your time, your kindness, your presence, without expecting anything in return. You understand that some seeds bloom silently. You've lived long enough to know, not everyone will say thank you. Not every act of kindness is remembered. Not every moment of support will be seen. And still, you give, not because it's noticed, but because it's needed. You've stopped keeping score. You no longer think, I did so much, and they didn't even acknowledge it. Because you give from overflow, not from emptiness. You don't need a spotlight to feel lit up. You don't need praise, or applause, or followers. You feel most alive when you're useful. When someone needed a shoulder, and you were there. When someone was drowning in worry, and you offered calm. No credit, no camera, just presence. You know the difference between giving and performing. You don't post every good deed. You don't announce every act of generosity. You don't use kindness as a brand. Your generosity is quiet, gentle, sincere. It's not for show, it's for the soul. You've found that giving is the reward. It fills you, centers you, reminds you of who you are. Even a smile, a simple, "How are you today?" to a stranger. A meal shared, a message sent just when someone needed it. These small offerings feel like worship now. Sacred, healing, human, and no one needs to see it. Because you feel it, that's a sign you've become a wise elder. When your kindness flows like water, quiet, steady, and life-giving. Sign number 7. You're at peace with who you are, and who you're not. There was a time you tried to be everything for everyone. The perfect parent, the perfect partner, the hard worker, the fixer, the forgiver. You wore so many hats. That one day, you forgot what your own head felt like. But now, you're softer, still strong, but more inward. You've let go of needing to prove yourself. You no longer chase approval, or wear masks to fit in, or pretend to know things you don't. You've come to know this truth. Peace begins where performance ends. You're comfortable with your edges. You know your gifts, but you also know your limits. You don't try to be the smartest in the room, or the loudest, or the most impressive. You're not afraid to say, "I don't know, I was wrong, that's not for me," and that honesty feels like freedom. You're no longer comparing your chapter 20 to someone else's chapter 10. You've stopped looking sideways. You've stopped trying to be younger, richer, flashier. You've seen what matters, and it's never been status. It's presence, alignment, the quiet joy of being exactly where you are. You're grateful for who you've become. Not perfect, but real. Not unshakable, but grounded. You've forgiven parts of yourself you used to resent. You've released dreams that no longer fit. You've made peace with the questions that might never be answered. And in that stillness, you've found something many never do. You're okay with being you. Nothing more, nothing less. And that is everything. Final reflection. If you see yourself in even 3 of these signs, you may be more of a wise elder than you realize. Not because of your age, but because of how you move through the world. With gentleness, with curiosity, with grace. If you feel that quiet shift in yourself, drop a comment. I'm becoming the wise elder I needed when I was younger. And tell us, which sign spoke to you most deeply? Your words might be what someone else needed today. Next video teaser. In the next video, we'll go even deeper. The story of a wise elder, what life taught me that books never did. A real, personal journey through mistakes, grief, growth, and wisdom. Not to impress, but to connect. See you there.